Hello, catering students. Today we're going to be talking about the pricing for catering events. And as I've talked about before, we know that this is both a science and an art because in order to do it correctly, in order to be a profitable caterer, this definitely takes a little bit of knowledge of both. Okay, so what are some things that we keep in mind as far as the goal for the pricing strategies as caterers? So obviously what we're trying to do is maximize the bottom line. So basically what that does is we're trying to make money. That's basically what that is we're trying to create a profit for ourselves, but without alienating the clients and making sure that they feel that they are not being taken advantage of. We're not price gouging them. So ensuring that whatever price we are charging them, they feel that they actually they felt the value from it. And obviously, what does that mean? That does not just, include the food, but includes the service, includes the entire process dealing with the client, right? So basically, what we want to make sure is that they understand that we were different and we were better than any other option that they could have had, inclusive of doing the event themselves. So that's very, very important. So when we're looking at what the actual science of it is, right? So we know kind of the art. The art is obviously what we put into the food and the decor and the menu design and all that stuff. But the science is really important behind it because we have to understand what the costs are. So yes, I want to put on this glorious, event for you and with swans and snow and whatever it may be. Bottom line is, I have to charge you for those things. And if I understand that potentially you might not be willing to cover those costs, or ultimately it's not really going to be worth having those swans there and charging you an additional $1,000 for them, then we need to understand that. So how do we do that? So obviously biggest thing is we need to understand what our costs are. So it's starting from food costs, labor costs, equipment costs, every single thing that we can do. Obviously menus. You guys have a lot of practice with this, calculating menus. It is unbelievable how many people don't really know how to do that in the business. And then obviously, yes, the art. So, here's the art not only in what we do, but also in how we're actually going to be charging the client. So this is kind of, I know I understand some people might be like, is this sneaky? It absolutely is. This is where we actually find ways to cover certain costs or hide certain costs in order to ensure that we are covering our general costs, our overhead, which means everything that is associated to the business. So everything from the gas for our trucks to, the electricity or whatever all that may be. Those are our general business costs. And we need to make sure that we hide all of those costs in one nice little bundle that we're presenting to the guests, and they feel the value and they feel, yes, this is totally worth with what they received. And that's our way of ensuring that we're going to get the profit. So there are two different ways that we can look at pricing, and we look at them in two different methods. So one is the reactive method, which a lot of brand new caterers do, or kind of these like mom and pop caterers who are not a business-oriented type of catering business. And then we also have the proactive method, which is the one that I personally like to practice and teach. And hopefully, if some of you guys are going into the catering business, this is the one that you will be implementing. So the reactive method, this is the one that basically you look at, okay, this is what I charged the client, this is what I spent, and okay, this is what I hopefully have left over. Okay, so it's kind of one of those things where you think you have the cost, you think you know what the costs are. This is what you think you're going to charge the client, and hopefully it'll be something left over for you to have in the end. So for this specific example, a profit of $250 is absolutely not an acceptable profit from doing an event. When you think about it, the $250 would have had to cover not only the event itself and you working the event itself, it actually has to also cover all the preparation work, every single thing, all your time and effort that goes into the actual event itself. So $250 profit is not a successful catering job. The proactive method, this is the one where we're looking at, what a desired profit would be. So this is almost, I always tell people, think what your price is. What is your price? What is the cost that you're associating with? What are you worth? Right? So by doing this event, after all the costs are covered, what do you hope to come away from? So a desired profit of $1,000 or $1,100, I might say, okay, that is an acceptable profit. That is something that I'm willing to do this event for. And what do I need to charge in order to have that. So the proactive method is very good in actually making sure that that we actually do that. How do we ensure that we're making profit? Don't underprice. Even in your assignment that you guys will have today for your factor pricing, which we'll discuss in a little bit, you need to make sure that people are willing to pay for your services. If your services are good, if your food is good, if your decor is great, if your communication is excellent, they are willing to pay, okay? Otherwise, they would do it themselves, right? So we want to make sure that everything is covered. Don't just think of the food. Okay, I want to have an event for $500, and you think in your head, oh, okay, I can feed 20 people for $500. No, that's the wrong way of approaching it. So let's look at how we kind of look at the costs and profits of organizations as far as catering is concerned. Okay, so we need to make sure that we know exactly what to charge the client. Now, whether or not we actually outline this or highlight this, that does not necessarily have to happen. But we need to know what those charges are, what those costs are. So, pens and papers and printer ink, whatever it may be, all those things, we need to understand what our operational costs are, and then we need to divide those up into the events that we are doing and making sure that there's some sort of a surcharge that is going to be covering those specific costs. So make sure that the profit, as discussed before, it can't just be whatever's left over. It needs to be part of your plan. I need to be walking into every single event saying, I will be making X amount on this and potentially more, right? Because the more could be referred business, the more could be new business, the more could be whatever else, right? So obviously this is something that we need to understand, that it has to be part of our equation, part of our business plan, not just, oh, it's left over, whatever it may be. Okay, as far as different things, we already discussed these: food, labor, all overhead. We need to make sure we actually cover that. So figuring out what the cost of food is, this one, I feel like at this point, you guys should be able to do this in your sleep. So the menu is just your beginning. This is your basic. This is something where you look at something and say, yes, we absolutely know this is how much it's going to cost. I'm going to have a crab cake. I know that's going to be, $125 a crab cake, 4 ounces, whatever it may be. And then it's very, very simple, right? This is something that should be pretty simple for caterers to kind of update spreadsheets on their computers. There's software out there that's really simple for this. So this should be pretty simple for people to figure out recipe costs, all that stuff. Labor is a little bit more challenging. Labor, when it comes to catering, we don't necessarily charge the client by the hour. So we charge the client by the event when it comes to labor. So it might be $500 for the evening, right? And then we determine how many people we need. Or it might be $5,000 for the evening, depending on how many people will be actually working the event. So we need to understand that the labor that we are charging to the client, not only, and this is kind of where it gets a little weird again, not only is it covering the labor that we're paying to our staff, but it's also covering the labor that we make money off. Typically, we make a certain percentage off of the actual labor. Okay. So this is something that we need to pay attention to, and we actually help incorporate this labor even into food, and we do that with the pricing that we will discuss in a little bit. These are all the other costs that we have to cover as far as, of the additional costs that people might think of. I already mentioned office costs, insurance, I did not mention that, advertising, rent, utilities, so anything that's part of running the business, salaries and benefits to full-time employees, all this stuff that are your expenses of running the actual business, right? So you need to know and understand what they are so that you can figure those out. All right, so as far as menu prices, this is where we get creative. This is where we understand, we have the science down to it, we know what everything costs, and now we're going to get crafty as to developing these prices that our clients will see. They'll think or they will see a value in them, but we are also covering all these other major costs within those prices. So we need to understand that we have that power, and much more power in that than we do in restaurants. So in catering, we actually have kind of a little bit, it's kind of a cool little system that we can actually do. All right, so this is what's called the factor method. It sounds like it's weird and strange, but it actually really, really works, and you guys will see that. So What we're looking at this is we're looking at a specific food cost for our food items, but what we're doing is we're actually incorporating in our menu prices not only the recipe cost, so not only the food cost of the specific item, but also a factor that is, that entails a couple of different things. It covers this part of the labor, operational costs, and we kind of do this as a factor method. So we're looking at a factoring formula, which is a recipe cost times whatever factor we decide. And the factor is based on what you deem is potentially something that you need to fabricate, or if it's something that you purchase and you have minimal effect on it. So for example, something like a food cost with a factor of 2, this would be a purchased item. So if you are purchasing a cake, okay, so you figure out what the cost is. If you take the cake, divide it by 8, you know what the cost is per slice. That's your food cost. And then you would actually multiply it by 2 to figure out what the actual menu price would be for your client, because you want to make sure that you're incorporating something a little bit extra into that specific item, okay? So that's where we're covering these costs. Food cost factor of 3, this is your average labor. This is something where potentially something might be prefabricated or it doesn't take that much time. So I'm trying to think, something like a pasta salad or something like that. That wouldn't be necessarily, that would be average labor, not too many ingredients, or like a little mozzarella salad, like we see the little boats up here. That would be considered a factor 3. Factor 4 and 5, this is really where it gets a little bit more complicated. And these are items that you typically are preparing yourself. So if you feel that this will be something where you're actually making it from scratch, where you're taking the extra effort into it, this is where you would actually be multiplying that recipe cost by a factor of 4 or 5, hence increasing your menu price for that specific item. You'll get a lot of practice on this with the assignment. All right. And finally, when we were looking at the pre-costing catering events and things that we actually have to put in there, I think we mentioned all of these. Basically, we looked at the food costs, the labor costs, anything that has to do. Also, delivery, setup, service, cleanup, if that's something that your company's going to be responsible for. Sometimes you can actually outline them, but a lot of times we look at these as kind of these fundamental costs. Clients don't like to be nickel and dimed. We don't like to be nickel and dimed, right? I'd rather see like a price and then tell me what it all includes. Okay. And then that way, there's almost some wiggle room if then somebody says, oh, I'm going to get my own, housekeeper to clean up or whatever it is. And then you can say, okay, well then we will deduct $100 from this or whatever it is. But make sure that you still know those prices are inflated, but you have a great understanding of everything that you are covering in those actual costs. Equipment rentals, anything like that, that's typically, if that is on the, you'll see on your assignment, we actually have those outlined on the bottom. Flowers, decor, music, this could be something, usually if you're adding them, you're doing the service for the client to actually be the third party to be doing all that stuff. So typically we do charge clients, and this stuff you would see on, itemized, because then you can have them make a decision if they want to get it themselves, whatever it is. But, like I said, for the most part, the food cost, the labor cost, the overhead are the ones that we actually cover in the menu price using that factor method. Different things that you will take into consideration when it comes to menu pricing. Obviously, something like the higher markup for smaller parties, because there's less per person. The per person cost might not be that much higher, but it's definitely a lot more work for a smaller group potentially, because you might not have that much labor. You might be doing it yourself. Whatever that markup might be, that's kind of what you guys decide. If guests cancel at the last minute, you have a canceling fee that covers kind of these extra food costs that you might entail. So all of those things are pricing considerations that you would typically put into your contract to ensure that you are covered in case that actually happens. So those are all things that we actually pay attention to, and different things that we incorporate into the overall pricing. So words of wisdom to you guys. There's no one correct method, but the one bad method is when you are actually give somebody a price without calculating your costs and not really knowing what it is. So we want to make sure that you actually know what you are charging for and that you are creating a value for the actual guest. And catering, remember, this is not just something that we do. It should be fun, and ultimately, you should make